Hello everyone. Saudi Arabia is interested in joining BRICS group, South Africa president says. What would it mean for US dollar and the dominance of Western financial structure in the world? Let's talk. Importance of Saudi oil for US and the world is well known. Petrodollar saved US financial system in 1970s, after US fiscal and foreign policy led to massive printing of unbacked US dollars, triggering a run on US gold reserve by European nations. In efforts to salvage the role of US dollar as a reserve currency, Nixon's administration had to come up with a replacement for gold, and it found it in oil. Since 1970s, oil, produced by Middle Eastern countries, was exclusively priced in US dollars. Dollars, received from oil exports by the Gulf countries, were reinvested back into US bond market. Scheme was simple but very effective. If you wanted oil, you needed US dollars. This arrangement caused massive demand for US dollars worldwide, but also forced other countries to invest these dollars back into US economy and support unsustainable expenditures by US government. For decades, US had a privilege to supply US economy with basically free oil, paid for by the currency it freely created, giving US ability to outspend its former rival Soviet Union. This led to an economic downfall of the latter, leaving US the only dominant military and economic superpower for nearly 3 decades. So what happened? Why, after decades of tight cooperation, US publicly threatened its major ally with sanctions. Today, US produces enough of its own oil and basically energy independent from Saudis. But it still derives an enormous economic advantage of US dollar being the reserve currency of choice in the world oil markets. But the situation is changing. As the share of US economy and world GDP is shrinking, importance of maintaining US dollar as reserve currency for US economy is increasing. US economy might collapse if dollar loses its use worldwide. Since 1960s, share of US GDP in the total world's GDP shrunk by a half, and now is only 23%. When US economy was a dominant power, using US dollars was a natural choice for many countries who wanted to trade with US. Now, with many countries trading outside of US or at allies' sphere of influence, use of dollar becomes a barrier and not a convenience. Just watch what strong dollar does to the trade balance of Japan, where all energy is priced in dollars. Or UK. I am not even talking about problems of developing countries, which are forced to prioritize accumulation of more and more pricey dollars to pay their debts, at the expense of investments into their own economies. In this environment, where free market mechanisms are no longer support use of US dollar as a reserve currency, formal arrangements, like LBMA's pricing of gold in US dollars, or Saudi's pricing of oil in dollars, becoming extremely important for US economy. Let's just put it simply. If no one in the world needs dollars to pay for goods and commodities or service debt, US will have nothing to pay with for its imports, hence a collapse of current economic structure of the US. US simply is not producing enough domestically to support its own consumption. Another problem is trade deficit. Besides US dollars, US has no exports in sufficient quantities to pay for goods we consume in US. US dollar, as a reserve currency, and demand for US dollar internationally, are critical for the US. Now let's take a look at the latest headlines. Saudi Arabia interested in joining BRICS group. Saudis sign military cooperation agreement with Russia. Saudi Arabia considers accepting yuan, and many more news pieces pointing to the same trend, which is that US is about to lose its monopoly on pricing one of the major commodities in US dollar. This is not a surprise. 40 years ago, US was a major customer of Saudi Arabia. That, and military support, made US important for the kingdom. Today, main customers for Middle Eastern oil are China, India and Asia in general. Accidentally, many of these customers are members of rapidly expanding BRICS organization. Besides growing economically, China, India and Russia increasingly gaining on US military dominance, and as a group, might surpass US and NATO in a not too distant future. As conflict in Ukraine demonstrate, conventional weapons systems are becoming obsolete and a chore to maintain. New autonomous robotic weaponry might turn legacy naval forces into a slow-moving inefficient target, and it is not clear if in current situation, US will be able to outspend the rest of the world on new military systems, while maintain its existing military operations worldwide. US budget deficit for 2022 is almost $1.4 trillion, financed by China and others.
Let me remind you again, I reduced the federal deficit. All the talk about the deficit from my Republican friends, I love it. I've reduced it $350 billion.
If US have to live within its means, how will it be able to afford $1 trillion military spending? If dollar loses its reserve status, and China and other major creditors withdraw, who will finance the deficit spending? The way I see it, the days of US dollar, as a sole world's reserve currency, are coming to an end. I hear a lot of opinions that it would take long time for the world to find a suitable substitute to US dollar. History shows it is not true. British pound lost 90% of its share as a reserve currency in under 20 years. From 35% in 1960s to under 3% in 1980s, with a bulk of its drop in just 2 years, when UK was forced to resort to a bailout from IMF. Can the same swift loss of reserve currency usage happen to US dollar? IMF reported, US dollar share of global foreign exchange reserves drops to 25-year low in its 2021 publication. It shows that the share of US dollar assets in central bank reserves dropped by 12 percentage points, from 71 to 59%, since 1999. This is a 20% decline over 20 years. With the latest actions of the current US administration, which included seizure of US dollar foreign reserves of Russia, sanctions of major players like China, which is a major buyer of US government bonds, uncontrolled government spending and deficits, diminishing share in international trade and many other factors, we can only assume that this decline will only accelerate. Latest power struggle between Saudis and US regarding oil production cuts is just another link in the chain. US plea to maintain production and rejection by OPEC shows the shift in power balance in the world. US response with a threat of sanctions and a lack of reaction by the kingdom just shows how limited US influence has become. BRIC is growing, because members see a mutually beneficial cooperation, with China leading the way with investments and support, while US is resorting to sanctions and trade wars. I will let you to decide which route will have a better outcome. Let me know in the comments what you think about chances US will retain its reserve currency status. Please subscribe and like if you would like to hear more on this topic. Thank you for watching, until next time.